Welcome everyone. So it's already 9 a.m. in New York, and we're ready here to start at Google Hangout to celebrate International Youth Day. As you know, this is a day to celebrate youth civic engagement, and we wanted to do it at WFUNA by inviting youth delegates, previous UN youth delegates, to talk about their experiences, and also to let you know how you can become a youth delegate yourself. So I want to thank first, of course, all the UN agencies that promoted the event, especially the UN Focal Point on Youth, who houses the UN Youth Delegate Programme within the Secretariat of the United Nations. And I also want to thank the youth delegates for being here. We have Elise Rath from Germany. She is a youth delegate from 2013 to 2014. And we have Luca Sciabotaru. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, Luca. He is a Romanian youth delegate for 2014 and 2015. So they will be here sharing and talking, sharing their experiences with you on how to become a youth delegate. I hope you have your coffees ready. I have mine here as well and ready to go. But before we go, I want to talk about the Youth Delegate Program itself and how it works. Just to set the stage on how the Youth Delegate Program works, it is one of the mechanisms for youth participation at the UN. There are several mechanisms. This is one of them. Basically, youth delegates come to the General Assembly every year. They join their national delegations to the General Assembly, and they can come in two capacities. They can either represent the youth voices of their country, or they can even represent the national position of the country on youth issues. So this varies from country to country, and I'm sure Elise and Luca will tell you more about it as we go on. It is important to highlight that the UN itself does not manage per se the Youth Delegate Program, in the sense that this is not a program where you can apply and get selected. It is the member states themselves that manage the Youth Delegate Program. The UN, what the UN does is that in the UN Focal Point on Youth, is that they support the youth delegates once they come to New York and to the General Assembly. But it's the responsibility of the member states to establish a youth delegate program and to select the youth delegates to come to the General Assembly every year. I just want to remind you that you can ask questions. On the right column, you'll see an option saying allowing you to ask questions, a Q&A, and of course we will take those questions and answer them as we go. So I think it was important to also highlight that is our hope that since the Youth Delegate Program remains in the responsibility of the member states, it is our hope, and this is why we're doing this Hangout, it is our hope that you contact your governments, you reach out to them and ask them to establish a Youth Delegate Program in your countries. This is very important. At WFUNA, we are working to increase youth participation at the UN, and this is why we're doing this. So let's just move ahead with the structure that we have for the panel. So I would like to ask Elise Rath, again from Germany. She is the youth delegate from 2013 to 2014. I would like to ask her if she could share with us a little bit about the selection process and how the Youth Delegate Program works in Germany. Elise?
Yes, happy International Youth Day to everybody. Thank you, Pablo, that I can be part of this. As Pablo has already said, it's up to every member state what they make out of the Youth Delegate Program. So I'm just going to very briefly present how it works in Germany and how youth delegates are selected. First and foremost, in Germany it's always 2 youth delegates, so it's always gender balance. So girl and a guy go. And anybody between the age of 18 and 24 can apply for the program. What obviously you should have is a strong interest in the United Nations and in youth policy as such. There is a four-level process of selection. So you have a written motivation letter that you send in. You have to answer written questions afterwards, the next step would be a telephone interview, and the last selection stage would be an assessment center in the capital in Berlin. And in Germany, the Youth Delegate Program is supported by the United Nations Association of Germany, as well as the National Youth Council and the two ministries, which are the Foreign Office and the Youth Ministry. So it's in total 4 supporting organizations that, in a way, help the Youth Delegate Program to grow and to be established. But in some, it's quite a timely, consuming selection process. But normally about 80 to 100 people apply, so it's quite a big program. Yeah. That's it.
Thank you, Elise. Thank you for giving us that introduction on how the Youth Delegate Program works in Germany. As you can see, we've have questions from the audience, but we'll answer those questions later. We'll come back to those questions later. What I can highlight from Elise, what Elise said, is that the Youth Delegate Program in every country works differently. The selection process is not the same in every country. And in some cases, you have partnerships, like Elise was mentioning. You have partnerships between different organizations within the country. And of course, the member state or the country is very important, because in the end, it's the one that decides to have a youth delegate program or not. In Germany, I guess that it's also important that the United Nations Association of Germany is involved in the selection process, and I believe also the Youth Council of Germany is also involved. But without further ado, I would like to ask Luca now to give us a little bit of insight on how the Youth Delegate Program works in Romania. Luca?
Thank you, Pablo. Happy International Youth Day to everyone. Good to be here. To talk about the Youth Delegate Program in Romania, so it exists since 2006. We already have quite a tradition in our Youth Delegate mandate. And it was developed by the Romania Youth Council since 2010. Since then, it is developed by the Ministry of Youth and Sports. And our selection process has 3 levels. At the beginning, you have to send your application, which is composed of recommendation, your CV, and an essay. Usually, the topic for the essay is chosen by the former youth delegates. So for this year, as our priorities for this mandate were the link between the educational system and the labor market, the youth unemployment, and the civic engagement of young people, we chose the topic as being the challenges faced by the Romanian young people regarding education, unemployment, or civic engagement in the context of the post-2015 agenda. So from the very beginning, if you wanted to take part in this selection process, you had to have an interest in the youth policies, also have some previous experiences of volunteering, and also to be interested in the UN. In Romania, for example, to be eligible, you have to be aged between 18 and 25 years old, so 1 year older than the youth delegates for Germany. And more than that, you have to have spent the last 6 months in the country. So it is supposed that when you apply for the youth delegate position, you are already connected with the youth sector in your country, with the NGOs, and also maybe with the national structures, and you know very well the grassroots initiatives, and also what are the challenges that the young generation faces. So after this first step, there is the semi-final, where the first 10 candidates are selected. It is also a program gender balance, so in the end, a guy and a girl will be selected as the youth delegates. And after this collective interview, which, as much as I remember, it took like 5 hours and a half, but you don't have to worry about this. The time is divided by 10 candidates. It is the final, where 4 of those 10 candidates are selected, and there you have a debate. You have a debate where the members of the jury, they also test the compatibility of the team. They also test your abilities, your knowledge, and so on. Mainly, this is how it works in Romania. We just had our our deadline for the applicants. So we had about, I don't know, more than 30 applicants for the next mandate, but they're all with a lot of experience behind, so it will be a tough selection process. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. Yes, definitely indeed. I think this is an important thing to highlight is that it's a very competitive process, and it varies again a lot from country to country. One of the things I like about the Youth Delegate Program so much is that it can bring together different sectors or different actors of society, usually governments, civil society actors, and also in the form of youth councils as well, or youth organizations. And in our case, we represent the World Federation of United Nations Associations, and our partners, our local partners, are United Nations associations around the world who also play a part in this. As I said, there are other groups playing a part in the Youth Delegate Program, like European Youth Forum with the national youth councils. And I think it's very important to highlight the work that all these organizations do towards increasing youth participation at the United Nations. I see a lot of messages here, a lot of questions. Of course, we will come back to them a little bit later on. And thank you from joining us from Mauritius and Bangladesh as well. So let's just, I think that one of the things about the Youth Delegate Program is that it's very focused on New York. It revolves around the idea of coming to New York, and like you were saying, you were mentioning the process before attending the UN General Assembly in New York. So I would like to ask a few questions. I would like to go with Elise right now and ask her what is expected of the Youth Delegate once the Youth Delegate is in New York, is at the UN General Assembly. I've heard some youth delegates have told me that you prepare a national statement and that you give this national statement at the third committee. I've also heard that you prepare side events and there's a youth resolution that is negotiated. Can you tell us, Elise, a little bit more about this, please?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you raised a very important point here that the Youth Delegate Program is not only about bringing the youth closer to the United Nations, but also bringing the United Nations closer to youth. So the youth, being a youth delegate, starts long before going to New York. And in Germany, that means touring the country, engaging with young people all over the country, with youth clubs, student organization, marginalized youth. And the aim of this, we call it Tour Through Germany, is to capture the visions, thoughts, and ideas of young people, which we will then bring to New York. And bringing these voices to New York means we have different channels in New York to convey the messages of the young people of our country, which are mainly a speech at the third committee of the United Nations. We also have the possibility in New York to organize a side event. Maybe not everybody is familiar with a side event. That mainly means a discussion, a panel discussion. It can be different format, but mainly a big event where lots of diplomats and people interested can join and learn about what youth delegates do, and also what young people in the respective countries want to convey to the United Nations. So side events, speech, and we also, every other year, there's a youth resolution that is also negotiated in the third committee, and we have a big say in it. We can advise the diplomats of our countries in what we as young people would like to see to be written in a resolution. And it can be very frustrating. Maybe this is also important to mention, to be at the United Nations, because things move extremely slow, extremely slow. Some people might even say, if you don't want something to happen, give it to the United Nations, but I would totally disagree. I mean, you just have to be prepared that even if you have a great idea, it might not necessarily end up in a resolution. I remember in our year we wanted to have a subclause in a resolution saying we don't want any discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, which was highly contested, but at least we got a discussion started. And even getting a discussion started is the first step into getting some changing mindsets, and in the long run maybe changing words on paper, and then in the long run changing reality. So even it's a long process and you might even move little steps, it's important. And as youth delegates you have different means to do it, mainly speech, side event, resolution, and obviously just talking to diplomats, because in the end it's also important to understand the mindsets of other diplomats, and in the end maybe to have an impact on them, to change them. And obviously what is very important in New York is the cooperation between different youth delegates. And it's always interesting with what kind of things youth delegates come up with. Might it be flash mobs at the United Nations or other exciting things. That's also a very important thing that's happening in New York. So yeah, that's it.
Perfect, Elise. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that you mentioned something very important, and it is that once youth delegates come to New York, they're able to collaborate with other youth delegates here. And that's what we want to see at WFUNA. We want to see more countries with the Youth Delegate Program, and that's why we are reaching out to youth and trying to provide the tools for youth to go to their governments and ask them to establish a Youth Delegate Program. I think that you know, everybody will have their own experiences, and it's important to, every time you hear or you talk to a youth delegate, approach them. Every time you meet a youth delegate, approach them and ask about their experience on what happened, what happened once they were in New York. But we talked about what youth delegates do once in New York, but also there's something else that youth delegates do once in New York, and it's their work with their national delegation, let's say with the permanent missions here in New York. So Luca, can you tell us a little bit more about that? What do you do once you're in New York? In your case, of course, your experience is the Romanian experience, because it's your mission with you collaborate once in New York. Luca.
Sure. Thank you, Pablo. So once in New York, for example, it also depends on the member states. In our case, we came with 3 priorities, as I already mentioned. So before coming to New York, we had some meetings with the national youth leaders to actually see what are the main challenges. And then after we came here, we discussed these topics with our permanent mission, and we identified the best tools to focus on them. Mostly, we shaped our schedule. We had our main interventions, then we organized a side event at the same time, and in the same time we collaborated with our permanent mission, as we attended some events, took some notes for them, and then created some reports that were really helpful for our permanent mission. More than that, it is very useful to understand that once you are there as youth delegate, you have the permanent support of your country's mission, and this is very important because they can provide you with access to documents that are relevant for the youth sector. That they can provide you with contacts, and even help you organize events. In other cases, for example, I know that the youth delegates were actually doing an internship at their permanent mission, so their collaboration was even greater. But I hope that in the next generation we will also be able to organize some internships for the youth delegates, so they will get into the atmosphere and into the context of UN. As much as I know, some countries they already have some internships at the national level, at the Ministry of Youth and Sports, and even the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So this would be an idea to multiply this kind of preparing the youth delegates before getting to the UN. If I would, and also talking about the thing that Pablo mentioned, I wanted to say that imagine that only 30 countries out of 193 have youth delegates. So only 30 countries actually prefer to send young people at the UN to talk in the name of their young generation. This is why we should, and referring to what Elise said, should act as one and focus a lot on our collaboration, not only as youth delegates but also as civil society and the NGO sector maybe, because only like this we will be able to make our voice heard. It's very important to find people that think like you, to find people that have the same values as you do, and start discussing with them and start establishing and taking initiative and speak up, as Ahmad said at the last meeting. Ahmad Al-Hendawi, it's the UN Secretary General Envoy on Youth. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca, for that. So I see that we have a few questions. Like I said, we will answer those questions later. And I see that we have people joining us from South Africa, Bangladesh, India, Sudan. So that's great. Thank you all for joining us. And as Luca was mentioning, every youth delegate has his own experience and how it relates to the permanent mission once they are in New York. I think it's, this is also for many people that do model UN, model United Nations, is a very important thing, the Youth Delegate Program, because let's say it's the next step in a model United Nations career, let's say. You do the model United Nations many times, and after that you get prepared in these simulations, you get prepared and you become a youth delegate, which is the official decision-making process. So once you're in New York, all the training you had in the model United Nations comes alive, because you're here in the United Nations in this decision-making processes, like Elise was mentioning, also the youth resolution and all the different positions coming into play, trying to come out with a youth resolution. So I think it's a natural process for people that are in model United Nations to become a youth delegate. But going ahead with the youth delegates, I see that Senel is online. Thank you for joining us, Senel.
Yes.
Senel is a youth delegate from Sri Lanka, 2014-2015. So Senel, I wanted to ask you, I want to give you the chance to speak a little bit about how the Youth Delegate Program works in Sri Lanka and how is the selection process done. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, sure. Firstly, I'm a little sorry I got a little late to join in. I am coming after a program we have to celebrate the International Youth Day. It was an event done at the Ministry of Youth in partnership with the UN. It was quite a big event, and there was a lot of traffic in the streets. It took me a little time to get back home. Sorry about that. So to talk a little bit about the program in Sri Lanka itself, Sri Lanka has now had the program for 3 years, and this is the 4th year that Sri Lanka is a part of the UN Youth Delegate Program. It's actually the only country in the South Asian region to be a part of the program. One of the few countries that are developing to be a part of the program as well. What happens with Sri Lanka and the application process is that every year the government releases a call for application, newspapers, and sometimes even television and radio and the internet, of course. And then the young people who see the advertisement are welcome to apply for the UN Youth Delegate Program. They are required to basically submit a sort of like an essay. Usually, is if you get the opportunity to be the youth delegate in Sri Lanka, what kind of change would you do, or what are your hopes, and so on. So you would write like that, and you would also fill an application form, which basically asks about your experiences so far, and then your qualifications, and then members of the National Youth Council would shortlist the applications. They would call everyone for an interview, and then in this initial interview, they would question everyone who comes on general things about general knowledge and then their involvement in youth engagement and so on. And then that would be the first round of interviews, and then there would again be a second round of interviews, and in that round, again they would question on similar things, but a little deeper, so to be a little more knowledge on, for example, the Millennium Development Goals and the post-2015 process and things like that, and a little more deeper about about youth engagement and youth issues in Sri Lanka. This year, we have just finished the selection process, and we did something a little bit. Usually what happens is there will basically be about 3 rounds of interviews like the one I said. But this year we felt like we could do something a little different in Sri Lanka. So what we did was we had a bit of a speech contest. So we asked after the second round of interviews, we got the top eight involved, and we had a bit of a speech contest. So we said, if you are selected as the youth delegate, you will be required to make a statement in New York. We call it the National Statement on Youth. And we said, if you get this opportunity, if you get to address world leaders in New York at this historic summit where the Sustainable Development Goals will what you say to these world leaders. And then basically we had a contest there, and then we had independent judges come from outside, basically people from civil society, people from different universities in Sri Lanka, and some young people as well. And basically we had this contest, and it was very interesting. People speak basically in whatever language. Usually the selection process in Sri Lanka was conducted only in English, but this year we opened it up and we said candidates can make their speeches in Sinhala or in Tamil, basically the two national languages of Sri Lanka as well, or English. And the third round, that was 50% of the total mark, and then the other 50% was again an interview as well. And we have just finished this selection process of 3 rounds, 2 interviews, basically 3 interviews and one speech contest, and we have just selected the 2 new youth delegates. Their names are Naushal and Thilina. I'm sure I think one of the 2 of them should be listening. They should also be heading home, and I was speaking about. But I'm very excited to introduce the 2 of them to everyone as well. That's really how the process works in Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Senil. That's great that the new Sri Lankan youth delegates have been selected. I think Sri Lanka being involved in the Youth Delegate Program is very important. Asia has the biggest, largest group of young people in the world. So unfortunately, in Asia, there are not many Youth Delegate Programs established. I believe that Sri Lanka, South Korea, and Thailand are the only countries that have a Youth Delegate Program in Asia. And it would be great to have more countries, given the fact that the largest group of young people in the world live in Asia. So congratulations to the new youth delegates from Sri Lanka that have been selected. There are many questions here, but I would like to start, and you can be either Elise, Luca, or Senil. You choose who wants to answer the question, which is basically how do we establish a youth delegate program? How can we take the youth delegate program to Bangladesh or South Africa, where they don't have a youth delegate program? Who wants to go first? Elise, I see you're raising your hand. Okay, Elise, go ahead.
Okay, maybe it's very important to have one thing in mind. Since 1981, almost in every youth resolution, states say, yes, we want to include young people in our delegation. So governments, all member states, clearly show their will, at least at the United Nations, to include young people in their delegations. So now that's a great starting point, because your government, the government of your country, wherever you're from, may it be South Africa, Malaysia, or wherever you're from, your government has said we want to do this, at least in front of the United Nations. Same thing happened with Germany. They signed a resolution in 1981, and basically they signed the resolution, but nothing happened, because UN resolutions from the General Assembly are non-binding. So nothing happened, and it was young people from Germany that discovered the resolution 2 decades later, and urged the government to actually do what they have stated, what has been written on paper, to put it into practice, to actually send youth delegates to the United Nations. And it took until 2005 till this happened, and it happened only because young people push the government. So if you are listening to this now and you don't have a youth delegate program in your country, it's actually in your hands to push your government. And it's not an easy way, one has to say, because pushing one's government is not always the easiest thing to do. But what you can do if you want to set up a youth delegate program is, first of all, identify the most important actors. That means maybe approach your National Youth Council, approach the Foreign Ministry, approach the Youth Ministry, the Permanent Mission, and also, if you have in your country, approach the United Nations Association, and then draft a proposal. There are some drafts available online. We can provide you with one, and then also ask for the input of youth delegates from other countries, from UN DESA, the focal point on youth from the United Nations, from WFUNA. So there's a lot of help out there, but it's very important that you have a proposal in written form and then hand it over to the ministries. And I think that is quite a big thing to do. It's a big task, but in the end, that's a good way of succeeding. So first of all, find allies. Then, second of all, find help from other people who have a youth delegate program already, and then go out and submit your proposal to the ministries. Yeah, that's how it worked. That's how it worked in Germany, and it took about the whole process took about 1.5 years. Then we had a trial year, and now after 10 years of having a youth delegate program, we're celebrating this year the 10th years of anniversary, and having had a lot of well, in the beginning, a lot of reaction from the Foreign Office. We finally, and this is big news, this year the German president will actually honor us for having such a great program, which in the beginning was a stony road to go down, but it's worthwhile the effort.
Thank you, Elise. And I think this is great. This is great that you mentioned this, because member states then, after a while, they realize the importance of having a youth delegate program in place, and they're very happy and very proud of the youth delegates that go through the youth delegate program in their country. So it's very important to highlight how comfortable Germany feels with the youth delegate program, and I think that should be the situation in many other countries. So I will share, of course, I will talk a little bit later about our handbook, the handbook that we created to help youth contacting their governments to ask them to establish a youth delegate program. But I would like to hear Luca's opinion on this as well, his perspective on how a youth delegate program can be established in other countries. How do we do that, Luca?
Yeah, as we talk actually about a change, it's a change of, you know, establishing establishing a structure, a program, and maybe sending to young people at the UN. First of all, as Elise said, you have to make like a stakeholder diagram, and you have to identify exactly who and with what they could help you. So first of all, maybe go to the youth structures and convince them that a youth delegate program would be their voice, not only at the national level but also at international level, and it would be a voice heard. After that, if you convince the youth structure, then go to the Ministry of Youth and Sports, and it's very important to highlight the advantages of such a program. For example, I had this year a national tour where I reached 13 cities, a few thousand of people, and I talked with them about the youth policies, about involvement, about education, and so on. And these advantages should be very, very well highlighted to the national authorities. So in this way, you have all the ingredients to make them decide that having such a program at their national level, it's not only a tool, but it's also an advantage in the international community. As we already mentioned, there are only a few countries, at least in Asia or Africa, that have such a program. So they could be actually among the first that would send young people there, that will give young people a voice. And more than that, if you have at the same time the support of the youth structures and maybe the Ministry of Youth and Sports, it will be easier to make a proposal to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In this way, not only that you could organize something at a national level and maybe try to identify according to the needs of your young generation and propose solutions for the government. It because if you propose solutions, it will be easier, and they will see the potential in this program. I was, for example, in my case, I was a bit reluctant when I got at the UN, and I said, okay, it's another youth delegate program. There are 2 young people that are sent there to deliver a message, and who will listen to us? But I was really surprised to see that after, for example, I delivered my statement, there were officials, there were diplomats, they came to us and they said, oh, look, we have pretty similar problems in our countries. What do you think are the solutions? And we start talking about this, and we started not only connecting people and initiatives, but also finding solutions, and taking those good practices from the international level and bringing them back home. And this is also a very, very big plus, bringing them back home and implementing them at the national level. It's very hard to make a comparison when you don't have another term of comparison. So if you go at the UN, you will see how other states refer to their young people, and you could go back home and say, well, look, I can see this challenge among I don't know, our young generation. Let's try this, or let's try another thing. And in the end, you will see that if you win, if you gain their trust, you will see the benefits, and they will also see the benefits. So as Elise said, keep on pushing, and the good things are never done easily. So keep on contacting them, establish meetings, and make concrete proposals, because nobody will give you money, funds, or trust for nothing. You have to come with a concrete proposal, expose very well the advantages, the good practices, and even the help that you can get from other countries that already have such a program. So go forward. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Luca, for the encouragement. I think what you said was great. Yeah, it's definitely not easy. We have to start from that. It's definitely not easy to have a youth delegate program. Like I said, you have to convince your government into establishing a youth delegate program. Many of the arguments you will hear is that money, the financial argument is very important. It comes a lot. But if you look at it, the youth delegate program is not an expensive program. Basically, youth delegates will, of course, need their airfare covered once they come to New York, and they, of course, need to eat and sleep, so they will need a place to sleep and food to eat. But before coming to New York and after New York, when they go back, before there's a selection process and the consultations, so of course that will need to be taken care of, and afterwards, the report, the evaluation, the transition into the new youth delegates. So it's not an expensive program. Again, we've been providing support on this. We can, of course, continue to do so. You see that you have our email there, youth@wfuna.org. Just send us an email. We will help you with this. We'll help you with the proposal and give you some tips and guidelines to contact your government. But Senel, I don't know if you... yes, Luca, you want to mention something?
Just a short mention, because you talked about the funding. So it's not mandatory for the government to ensure all the funding. You can also connect with the private sector. And in my case, I was supported by some private companies in Romania, and I could do my national tour. But so in the same time, you can understand the potential of this program. I think there are a lot of private stakeholders that would like to invest in youth and see that they take initiative. So take this advantage, think about this, and maybe when presenting those proposals to the government, also mention that as alternative sources of funding, like the private sector, because I think it's feasible. Thanks.
Yes, definitely. The private sector is an actor that we should take into account. Note that this is not only the reality of Romania. There are other youth delegates that managed to fund the program in their countries by contacting the private sector as well. But Senel, do you want to mention? You want to answer the question as well? You want to add something to the question of how can we establish a youth delegate program in other countries? And I think your contribution is very important, coming from Sri Lanka. And being one of the pioneers of the youth delegate program in Asia. Senel. Senel, we can't hear you. I think your microphone is on mute, so just try to unmute your microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Okay. Sorry about that. What I was going to say was I have very little to add now that Luke and Elise have spoken, but maybe I could share a little story about how the program started in Sri Lanka. Basically, one of the first few youth delegates from Sri Lanka was Fatima. She was in New York for a different meeting, and she was basically attending in her capacity, not as a youth delegate. But she saw what happened while I was attending meetings. She saw youth delegates, she met some youth delegates, and then she asked them about the program, and then she learned about the program there. And then she came back, and then she made an appointment with members of basically with the chairman of the National Youth Service Council, and she pitched him the idea. The chairman found out about the youth delegate program. So the point I wanted to make is that sometimes some of the people in those decision positions are not aware of the youth delegate program themselves. Because, for example, of course, governments have committed to sending youth delegates, but sometimes it's done through diplomats, so those messages don't get communicated. For example, the chairman of the National Youth Service Council here didn't know the message. Sometimes what happens the government, so you government know sometimes what has happened before. So sometimes there are definitely like lacks of communication as well in history. So sometimes governments genuinely don't know um, about the existence of the program. Even when we were in New York, we were talking to some diplomats, and even some diplomats from the third committee and themselves didn't know the existence of the program. And they said, oh, maybe this is something we could talk to our government and get them to send youth delegates. These are diplomats maybe from countries that have committed to sending youth delegates before, but there is definitely like that gap in communication. And then what he said is very true. It helps to look at different documents that your government has committed to, and then use them as to support your case. Not necessarily UN documents, for example, even the outcome of the World Conference on Youth, which is in Colombo. A lot of governments were represented in Colombo at that conference, and even that document talks about the importance of sending youth delegates as a part of the national delegation. So you can, even that not binding, but definitely you could use that to support the case to say that, look, our government is in Colombo, and then they committed to sending national youth delegates. So I think it's your responsibility. So it's easy to use documents like that in your advocacy as well. Yeah, I think to add.
Thank you, Senil. I think this is a very important point. Yeah, I've talked to several diplomats here as well, and in some cases, it's not that they don't want to have a youth delegate program. It's that they are not aware that this mechanism exists. So you know, the Sri Lankan experience is definitely an interesting one, because it tells that this is important for young people to go to their governments and say, hey, this is here, this exists, and your government signed that they wanted to have a youth delegate program, that they wanted to increase youth participation in the UN and in the decision-making processes in the UN. So thank you for your contribution, your comment on that. I think it's time to take some questions from the audience here that asks several questions here. Let's go, and I think Elise and Luca talked a little bit about this, but I think it's important to answer clearly which member of the government we would have to contact to have a youth delegate program. So let's go with this question from Gitesh Gurab. Which member of the government we would have to contact to establish a youth delegate program? Who wants to answer that question? I see Luca raising his hand. Go ahead, Luca.
All right. So as we already mentioned, it depends from country to country. In some countries, the delegate is developed by the Ministry of Youth. In other countries, directly by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But in all of the cases, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is the one that actually creates the link between the national and the international level, between the government and the permanent mission at the UN. So if you want to get support at the beginning, you could contact some officials from the Ministry of Youth, so they could support your idea. And after that, for example, you could contact the state secretary or directly the minister if you have access to him or her. And afterwards, I think it would be advisable to contact the UN direction from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Usually they deal with these issues. They ensure the permanent connection between the international level and the national policies, and they will be actually the best ones to answer your request, or even to, if they are not competent, to forward your email or your proposal to the member that are to the member of the government that is actually has the power or to take such a decision. Usually the program are established directly by the minister, but if you can't get directly to him or her, it would be best to get to the UN direction from the MFA. This is how it works in Romania. If Elise wants to add something, I don't know, it may be different in other countries, but I'm pretty sure that every Ministry of Foreign Affairs has a department or a direction that is responsible for the communication with UN level and so on. Thanks.
Thank you, Luca, for that. Yes, it's let's say the two most important actors here within the government, the Ministry of Youth and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But I would say the final decision maker here is the Ministry of Youth, which is in charge of all UN affairs. So that's a good point there to contact the department or the office of UN affairs within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the country. Does anyone want to add something else? No, I think that question was answered. So let's go ahead. I think there was another question here. It's also important to highlight. So the UN Youth Delegate must be between 18 and 24 years old. That's a question here from Julissa Rocha. Who wants to answer that? It's important to clarify that point. Elise, I see Elise raising the hand. Elise, please go ahead.
Wait. Okay. So actually, there is no fixed age for being a youth delegate. The United Nations definition of youth is normally between 15 and 24. That's what they use for their statistical purposes. For the Youth Delegate Program, again, it comes down to each member state to define how old the youth delegates should be. Normally the minimum age would be 18, just because of traveling to New York by yourself and so on is easier when you are at the legal age. But this is really not a restriction that needs to be put. I think also younger people would make great youth delegates. And youth in general is a concept or that is up for definition for each country, and each culture has a different view of who's young and who's old. So really this again can come down to each country. And Luca has said in Romania, youth delegates tend to be older, or the applying age can be from 18 to 25, if I'm not mistaken. So this is really open, but it's convenient to say something in the range of 18 to 25, just more for convenience rather than that this is something set in stone. Yeah.
Perfect, Elise. Yeah, thank you for that. Senil, what is the age range in Sri Lanka for the youth delegates? How old are the youth delegates in Sri Lanka?
The definition for youth in Sri Lanka are 16 to 29. When it comes to the Youth Delegate Program, it's usually up to the National Youth Service Council to determine the age limit of the youth delegates. But this year, when we put out the call of applications, we felt it was best to say anyone between the ages of 18 and 26. Like it's basically the National Youth Service Council felt like it was important to have someone who's relatively younger with lesser commitment as a youth delegate to be able to commit a lot of time to be a youth delegate, and they were looking at someone who's probably not definitely like working full time or something like that. So that's why the age limit 29, which is the national upper age limit for youth, to almost 26. So in Sri Lanka, from 18 to 26. So it has been different depending on the year. but it has been within that age range of 18 and 29. 1 year it was 27, and another year it was 29 itself. So it's been within that national age limit, but sometimes the government, depending on the national youth service, each year have maybe lowered that age range as well sometimes.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sano. I think that's very important. The age criteria, the age definition is very fluid, so it changes from country to country. And this is something that is established once you establish the youth delegate program. You say the criteria for a youth delegate, it's from 18 to 24, from 18 to 25, or from 18 to 30. Of course, 18 I think is important criteria because you need youth delegates to be able to travel, and below 18 you need permission from the parents or the parents to come with a youth delegate. So I see that there are other questions here related, very important to which countries have a youth delegate program. And I think this is also important to talk and to touch upon this point. Does Canada have a youth delegation? I believe Canada doesn't have a youth delegate program. Malaysia, there's a question here in Malaysia. Does Malaysia have a youth delegate program? I don't think Malaysia has a youth delegate program. India doesn't have a youth delegate program. South Africa doesn't have a youth delegate program. So it's important also to highlight that in some cases the youth delegate program exists and young people are not aware of it. We receive sometimes questions from people that from a country that already have a youth delegate program, but that they don't know about it. So I would say that if this is the case, that the most important thing is you go to the UN website, and you will see from the UN website that they will explain who are the youth delegates and where they come from. Sometimes some countries, some member states send a youth delegate one year and they don't send a youth delegate next year, so it varies a lot. So after checking the UN website, also check your ministry's website. That information should be on your ministry's website as well. So let's go ahead with one question that I saw here that I think is important to answer. Let me scroll down and see. Okay, so this one from Julissa again. She said, can we act as a UN Youth Delegate and participate as an Action 2015 coordinator? I'm not sure what our responsibilities of Action 2015 coordinator are, but I think that the question we can expand it to, can we act as a youth delegate and participate also in other initiatives within our country or within other UN agencies? I don't know if I'm being clear with my question here and expanding the question, but I don't know if any one of the youth delegates wants to answer this question. Elise, I see. Yeah?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you are involved in any UN initiatives in your country, it's a good starting point for being a youth delegate because you're already exposed to many of the issues that are relevant to young people from the United Nations. So it would be even a good starting point if you are a coordinator for Action 2015 or for other initiatives that might have to do with the United Nations. So I don't see that as exclusive, that one or the other would be excluding each other, but as complementing each other, because you might have a certain expertise to bring with you that you can then already use as a youth delegate. So if you're involved, a perfect starting point, I would say.
If I may add something. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that a huge advantage of the Youth Delegate Program is actually that you are mainly selected by maybe your MFA or even the youth structures, but you are very connected with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Youth. So you have an easier access to the information, to the relevant information, to the youth sector. And then when you go at the UN, you have a D badge. Actually, you are part of your national delegation. So you have access to some meetings where NGOs don't have. This is a very important advantage because you're actually part of your national delegations. And as an advice, maybe after becoming, and if you succeed in establishing a youth delegate in your country, the best way to push things forward would be to connect with the civil society, to find what are the needs of those youth structures, and then facilitate their access at the decision makers. Because you are there, you are also part of the Youth Delegate Program, which in most of the cases is implemented by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You are very connected with the Ministry of Youth and also with the permanent mission. So you have some tools that usually NGO don't have, and you should use them to make some things happen in the advantage of youth. So this is one piece of advice maybe it would be useful for you. Thanks.
Thank you, Luca. Senel, do you want to add something?
I can add something very little. This is, I just want to say that maybe this is usually the case. A lot of people who get selected as youth delegates, a lot of time young people who are very active in their communities already. It's usually either through NGOs or different civil society movements or student movements and so on. So it usually, especially definitely in Sri Lanka, but I know in other countries as well from my experience of meeting other youth delegates in Sri Lanka, usually people who get delegates are people who are very active in their communities. We had young people as youth delegates who basically climate activists in the country, people who are specialists in mental health, and so on. So there are a lot of people who are coming from very diverse backgrounds, but a lot of people who were already engaged in very strong civil society movements already. And as Luca said, being a youth delegate can definitely help you bridge the gap. Countries, I know this is definitely the case in Sri Lanka. There is sometimes a gap between the government structures, such as the youth ministry, and then young people working in civil society movements. So especially when you come as a youth delegate from a civil society background, then it really helps to kind of bridge that gap a little bit and try and connect what's happening, some of the youth initiatives that are done by the government, but also some of the things that are happening through civil society movements, and you can find the bridge between the two, and that's really helpful because, as Lucas said, as a youth delegate, you get a D badge, and that gives you an access to a whole lot of meetings and so on. And it's definitely the GA is definitely the best time to be in New York, so there will be a lot of influential people that you might have access to, and then and you could get with different civil society movements that you are a part of as well.
Thank you, Senel. Yes, we're running out of time, so there are many questions here. We won't be able to answer all of these questions, but of course, feel free to contact us again at youth@wfuna.org with these questions. We will answer them. And before we go, this is an important question that I think we need to discuss. And just briefly, youth delegates, please, can the permanent mission of a country to the UN help establish the delegation at any level? So I see Luca raising his hand. Luca, can you answer that question?
Yeah, I wanted to mention this at the previous question. So it would be even better if the recommendation of establishing a youth delegate program comes from the permanent mission. So actually, if you can contact somebody from the permanent mission, I think it's even easier to find their contacts than finding the contacts of some Minister of Foreign Affairs officials or Minister of Youth officials. Just contact them and explain this, because they are even closer to the UN environment and they understand better the importance of having young people in the global arena of the United Nations. So if they understand this thing, they could like forward or make themselves a recommendation and send it to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. If you can get like pressure, not necessarily pressure, but understanding and recommendations from all as many parts as possible, it would be even better, and you increase your chances of making the decision makers accept and promote and develop such a program.
Perfect, Luca. Thank you. Thank you for that. We have to go now. It's almost 10 a.m. here in New York. But before we go, I want to share with you some resources that you could use to establish a youth delegate program in your country, and some resources that could help you. Of course, we developed a handbook. Let me share my screen so that you could see what I'm trying to mention. So, for example, let me go to my screen here. You go to our website and you can see WFUNA.org/youth handbook. This is a handbook that we created to help young people establish the Youth Delegate Program in their country. So I would encourage you to go check it, and please contact us afterwards if you need any help. WFUNA is working on, like you see here, significantly increase youth participation at the UN, so we'll definitely be very glad to help you here establishing the Youth Delegate Program in your country. Of course, check also the handbook from the UN Focal Point on Youth. Just go to the UN website and check their handbook, Guide to the Youth Delegates to the United Nations. So these are very important resources to use. Once you want to establish a Youth Delegate Program in your country, you would of course need to develop a proposal and contact important stakeholders in your country. So we would definitely help you in this regard. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now, and of course these are resources again that are very helpful. Please again contact us. We're here to help, and of course you can contact youth delegates as well and ask them for some help. Elise has always been helping Luca and Senel as well on trying to establish youth delegate programs in other countries as well. We have to go right now. It's already 10 a.m. Thank you for your time. Thank you for logging into the Google Hangout. Thank you, youth delegates, for being part of this and working on increasing youth participation at the UN as well. After this, the UN is celebrating they're celebrating International Youth Day. There are many events lined up, so please check the WebUNTV website. You will see that there's an event organized by the UN on International Youth Day, and particularly this year, which is Youth Civic Engagement. Luca, I think you want to mention something before leaving. Is that correct? Am I correct?
Sorry?
No, I thought that you wanted to mention something.
No, just like a final word for all those who are watching us, to thank them and to remember that only by keeping involved in the youth policies you can push things forward. So thank you and keep up the good work.
Perfect. Yes, and thank you for the work that you're doing as well. Thank you, Elise. Thank you, Seno, and thank you, Luca, for joining us in the Hangout. Happy International Youth Day.